Hi guys, welcome to Digital Empaths, and I'm your host Sushant Tejmani.
Hey guys, this is Sundar here.
So guys, we are really delighted to have a new guest to our episode today. His name is Jatin Bhasin, who is the Vice President of Product Management with Capital Float, one of our very leading fintech companies here in India. So Jatin.
I am currently, as Sushant mentioned, VP Product Management at Capital Float. I'm managing almost all products at Capital Float from a product management angle. So Capital Float, when it started, right, we did not have enough building blocks for fintech. So we built everything in-house. So we are primarily into lending, SMEs and consumer. So at Capital Float, we build like our loan management system, the loan origination systems in-house, and then bunch of lending products for our SMEs, MSMEs, consumers. The most recent project which I've been working on and quite excited about is the checkout financing part, which we have partnered with Amazon and Make My Trip. So it's called Amazon EMI and MMT Trip Money. Essentially, a consumer can come on Amazon or Make My Trip and apply for a loan, and he gets a line of credit in real time and then consume the line on the checkout.
So Jatin, if you look at the current industry, because right now we are expecting that there might be a recession phase coming up soon.
Yeah.
And there's already a cash crunch in the market. I think demand have gone down, consumer spending has gone down. And I think there is definitely a lot of ambiguity, a lot of nervousness right now in the market. So I think in this kind of an environment, how is the fintech as a sector is surviving? Because I know you guys serve to the MSMEs, you guys also serve to the consumers, you guys also serve to some of the online merchants. So, and that sector, as I think, is heavily impacted. So what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, so I think that's what I wanted to stress on, right? So in financial services, if you see, first of all, what are the initiatives which government have taken? Let's cover that. And before I come to that, what are the impacts, right? So I think there is a sort of a double whammy where there are demand shocks which have started to come, but because of cash crunch into the place, there are supply shocks as well, right? In places where there are demand, right? To cover that, I think, first of all, what is our mental model, right? The mental model is to cover the last mile delivery of funds, which I think is the execution part, which I was trying to say that there's a room of improvement there. But if you see in last few days, RBI has reduced the repo rates and the reverse repo rates for banks. There was a moratorium which RBI recently introduced. So from March to May, a moratorium has been introduced where there is the consumers or the SMEs are not expected to, like, they can opt in and not pay their EMIs and the loan tenure gets extended. Mm-hmm. So that was a great move from an end user perspective, but I think that has to be passed on to NBFCs as well. So how does financial services work, right? So banks, they raise funds and then NBFC get loans from banks, and then NBFC passes on to MSMEs and consumers. Now, if a consumer has been given a moratorium from an NBFC side, of course, the NBFC also has to be given a moratorium from bank side. Otherwise, there will be an ALM mismatch at the NBFC's end, right? So in the recent speech by governor, there was no mention about the moratorium being passed to NBFC, so which will be a big blow to NBFC because there will definitely be the ALM mismatch. Of course, the bigger ones would be able to take that hit and for like couple of months or 3 months, which the moratorium has been passed on. But I think for a smaller NBFC, right, and who are targeting a small ticket size, which is right now the need, right? I think that would be a big hit. But yesterday, the RBI governor released a targeted repo rate, long-term repo rate correction. So that for 50,000 crores. So banks would be auctioning in a few days. But let's see again the execution, right? So once they get it, banks are typically extremely risk averse. So how do they play out in this area is going to be important. It's like important to see.
Yeah, sure, definitely. Sundar, you want to say something?
No, it's interesting that when you're considering any of these measures by the central the government here, you need to think about and keep in mind the entire value chain, that all these members in the value chain, how does it impact each of them?
Yeah.
So I'm just processing that as interesting.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing, that like if the end customer is not like given the benefit, if NBFC start passing on the benefits, then I think, yeah. So right now, if you see, most of the banks and NBFC have paused their disbursal, but this can't be like for a very long term, right? Otherwise, the entire economy is gonna crash.
Absolutely.
Of course, most of the financial services, if you see the recent comment by Bajaj also in their discussion with their chairman, they created multiple scenarios: the best case, worst case, and the base case. More or less, this year is like a write-off for most of the financial services. But yeah, but I think overall, I'm quite bullish that we are going to come out of it. But we have to see that this 1 year, what are the things which we have to work on to keep the economy there. Of course, there is a hit. We can't avoid that. Like, there is a medium term to long term hit which we will get. And as you were mentioning, that the country and globally a recession has already come. We are part of it.
Yeah.
But I think this is also a great time for us to stabilize internally, to reserve cash, for us to create features and products internally, so essentially the vanity metrics are not that important anymore. That what kind of growth rate you have or what kind of disposals you are doing, but at core, what are the things which you believe in? Like, focus more on your customer by making your processes more digital for the upcoming time, whenever the lifts are gonna happen, and then what kind of solutions these fintechs and all that are going to extend to an end consumer.
So I was reading a report of last year when Mr. Amitabh Kant of NitiYog, who's the CEO of NitiYog, he was mentioning that by 2020 we're expecting the whole fintech industry to reach maybe around $31 billion. Yeah. And I think it's currently still the third largest fintech market in the world. And in the last 3 to 4 years, if you see, there's a lot of investment has come. I think roughly around $6 billion has been invested in the whole fintech and financial services sector. So I think the outlook looks very promising. I think the numbers are very good. And unfortunately, this whole unprecedented event which has happened in this year. So do you think this year is going to see a downfall, especially for the fintech sector, or the fintech sector is still going to show a lot of resilience?
So, yeah, so if you look at fintech, right? So first of all, I'm quite bullish on fintech still. I think there are still a lot of problems which are unsolved. If you look at fintechs, primarily it is into payments, lending, insurance, advisory, wealth, right? These are the main, maybe the top 5, 6 forays which fintech is working on, right? I think in last few years, if you see, fintechs have changed. Like 5 years back, fintech used to say that we're going to disrupt banks altogether, right? But of late, I think fintechs have also evolved to a point that there has to be a deep partnership with a bank, and banks are partnering with fintech to do the last mile delivery, right? Fintechs they are extremely agile to change their processes. They can create like a cross-functional team and create a very specific niche product for a specific sort of a customer. That would be very hard for a large bank or for that matter, any large organization to do, right? So yeah, I am quite bullish. And also, if you see the cycle which I was mentioning, right? So in fintech, if I were to talk about lending, right? So these are the times to improve our underwriting models. So globally, if you see, right, in fintech and especially in lending, right, that the companies who were built, or rather the products which were built when we are coming out of the recession have gone up like anything. So outside of fintech also, of course, the Disney and Apple were also companies which were created during recession, and we know where they are right now.
Yeah.
The reason to do that is because if you see the cohorts of those customers which they acquire, they are able to see a lot more trends in that customer and data patterns, that they are able to call out that who would be the right set of customers and who are not. So that especially helps fintech to create a product. And if there are guys who are trying to create a company altogether, early startups, I think that is there. Also, if I were to talk about startups, right, VCs are there. The relationship with a VC is like an 8 to 10 year journey, right? So I think this is still, at least I believe it's a temporary phase. It's going to be there for a year or two impact, but I think in 8 year, 10 years timeline, this is going to phase out.
I think I was reading a recent report you guys raised recently at $15 million. Huh?
Yeah.
That's a good sign. I think if in this kind of an economy, I think investors are still investing money. I think that's a good sign. Definitely a good sign.
They're quite supportive and they understand, right, that the like Corona and all that, as you're mentioning, is are unprecedented events and at nobody's fault, and especially people in which the raw material is money. We need a lot of cash to help our customers.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
It's interesting you briefly touched upon this. In this sort of an environment, with whatever budgets you have available, to sort of balancing between keeping the lights on versus developing new features for your product itself. How do you take that call? How do you make that balance? There is one, you have a product roadmap for the product that you have built, which you need to keep pushing ahead. And on the other side, there is only so much of a constrained budget, and therefore there is money that has to go into keeping the lights on also. How do you compromise? Do you not compromise? How much do you hold back? Yeah. What's your thought on that?
Oh yeah, so I think this is more of a product management question, and I
Yeah.
think irrespective of times, right? So this always comes to a PM where prioritization comes in. So at Capital Float, what we do is we look at our unit economics really well. So right, so on like almost a daily basis or a weekly basis, we go back and look UE, and at UE itself, we are able to figure out that what are the things which are not working for us, and we try to improve that, right? And keeping in mind that it is while something, so the basic principle what we apply is something should be desirable for the customer. It should be feasible for us to build. We are in the right space that we can solve that problem of a customer. And of course, it should be viable for our company as well. There is no point building something which is like eventually just a cash burn, right? And with no long-term thing for us to generate revenues, right? So I think once you keep that principle in mind, we are able to like prioritize much better. And of course, we have our regular check-ins where there is a roadmap for every PM which is laid out. And then there are multiple product managers who are putting down their roadmaps. And then at times there are clash. But that's where the senior management, the leadership comes in to resolve those clashes and see what can be taken up. But this is irrespective of fintech. This is irrespective of fintech. But yeah, build something where you have biggest bang for buck.
Right. What, in your opinion, is sort of a success metric for a product management function, a business function within an organization? So, what are you measured against as a function itself within an organization?
Yeah, so I think before that, right? So let's talk about product management first in general, right? So there are many articles, blogs, and all that, and some of those cliched lines, right? That you have to be like, they are typically the CEOs of their product, right? And you have to be authoritative without having any authority, right? So, and when I say such lines, right, then these are those catchy phrases which are being used and extremely cliched, but somewhere if you see, these are true, right? So I think a real product manager should ideally not be authoritative. It's just by their sheer knowledge and the kind of data the PM looks at, how much that PM is respected in the company from, when I talk about like from different peers and cross functions, right? So if you look at a product manager, the product manager specifically has to talk to every single vertical in a company, be it tech, be it like design, operations, sales. In lending, there's like, we have a credit team, underwriting team, and then we have to interact. When we come up with something, how much they listen to you, how much they respect those things, that, oh yeah, this guy has come up with something like this, a product roadmap, this makes a lot of sense. And you would be able to convince rather, or you would be able to get them going just because only when you have looked at data and only when it is logical. If it is just by your own guts that, yeah, let's go ahead and build it, I think maybe like a one or two features you may roll out, but then eventually people are slowly, gradually going to start realizing that he's just coming up with his own whims and fancies and releasing something, but it may or may not create a huge impact to the company, right? So I think for a product manager, looking at data is the key thing, right? Second, I think, is the sense of ownership, right? Of course, ownership is something which is across function, but for a PM, I guess it's the most needed. because in the end, the success or failure is totally in a product manager's hand, and he should always be on the lookout, like where there are the loopholes and where to get these kind of things get fixed, right? The third is also about customer empathy, right? So I think inside a company, PM is the person who should represent the customer, right? Everybody else would be after their top lines and bottom lines and P&Ls, right? But customer experience is also a like key in it, right? So you may have created a product which is extremely profitable, but if there is no market to it, there is like customers are not liking it, there's no desirability, the product is anyways not going to do any business, right? So that is the top reason for people not to do great business, right? So if you were to see a rank order why products fail, there is no market for it is the biggest reason for products to fail, right? So that is one key thing I think product managers have to keep in mind. And of course, I think they have to be really sound on the stuff what they are trying to solve, right? PMs have to be really have like a rock solid in-depth knowledge about the thing what they are trying to solve, right? So for example, if you're in lending, you have to understand how the business works, right? You have to understand how tech works, right? Like not just culturally how tech works, but also understand that how different APIs and integrations work out. So great in-depth knowledge is also a key. You at start, a product manager may not have a knowledge about it. So it's always great to hire generalists, but eventually in the long run, that's one skill which a product manager has to develop.
And according to you, in the last decade or so, how the product management as a function has evolved? Because I myself have played product manager role at multiple organizations, and I think I've been seeing over the last 13, 14 years, I think the function has evolved. I think there's a very thin line between your product marketing, your product delivery, and your product management. I think earlier, I remember there used to be a specific role for that. When I was at eBay, we used to have a separate role for product marketing, a separate role for product delivery, a separate role for product management. And I think in this kind of an economy where you are cash crunched, I think you have to achieve a lot in a small budget. Okay, you can't, because ultimately you can't have a very big team. I think the teams have to be leaner. So what's your take on what kind of team chemistry you have in your organization when you look at your product marketing versus delivery versus management?
Yeah, so it depends from different organization and the size of organization. So I work very closely with our partners where I've seen different organization structures. So if you were to see, right, so let's say look at Microsoft, right? Typically there are program managers, right? And if you see Amazon, there is a technical program manager and a product manager and a product delivery manager. So there are other roles because they work at altogether a different scale. For most of the startups, what I like, at least I've seen working in is there is some sort of a pod which a startup creates, and pod is a small team which is trying to solve one problem statement at some point in time. So a pod typically comprises a PM, a set of developers. I'm talking about tech companies especially. So a product, a set of developers, QA, shared design person who is shared across different pods, a data engineer. And when I say a data engineer, it could be a decision scientist where the person is creating models, or it could be that the person who the team who create models is again shared, but the data engineer who is getting stuff done and making sure that the data is being collected in a way which could be consumed for models eventually, that person. So again, so across different pods, I see that at times PM plays a role of, in general, the product management role. That person himself or herself is doing the product marketing, but I suggest that it's better that if there is one person who is for product marketing across different pods, not like a pod. So across company, if you have like a product marketing person who would be able to take care of at a company level, that person would be able to see that how things can be done, and some sort of a business analyst, right? So this is one skill set which I think all PMs should learn, is to fetch your data like yourself. One, it is quite time efficient that you are able to fetch whatever you need when. And also, of course, when you fetch the data and you look at a certain report, there are further queries in your mind which you only get after looking at data, right? And then having a dedicated resource just to fetch data for you, I feel sometimes it may be not so viable and could be slightly inefficient. So writing simple queries for yourself is a great thing, which I think product managers should learn. Also, I feel if I have before Capital Ford, I worked with SAP, which is like a large enterprise in enterprise software, right? So there's a concept of Scrum Masters, which were who essentially interacts with different teams. I think a product owner or a product manager, Scrum Master, a partial product marketing guy, a sort of a partial business analyst has rolled up into one job description, which is a product manager, typically in startups. I think in large enterprises, these roles are required because there are, again, multiple teams, and the products which are also getting released as a suite of products. So you launching something agnostic of the rest of the company doesn't work at times. In startup, this works out that we, like a small pod can release a feature without checking in with other teams. One company to look out for to understand org structures and keeping product manager in mind is Spotify. So they have solved it really well. There are like a lot of blogs out there that how do they resolve conflict between teams and how to keep the team leans and shift them into different projects as and when they come up.
I think they are the one, I think, who mastered this whole lot of minimum viable products. No? So they are the one who actually came up with this whole concept of minimum viable product many years ago.
Exactly.
And so yeah, they mastered that. And so just another thing that you mentioned at the beginning of the discussion was empathy. I think you are dealing with an audience, whether it's consumer or whether it's a business, who have either been rejected by the banks, okay, or by other NBFCs, and they've come to you with a lot of hope. Okay, maybe the cash flow statement does not look very rosy, and definitely when you do the risk profiling of these kind of customers, they may not come very on a high scale that, okay, yes, these are the eligible entities. So how you bring the whole role of empathy here, build the trust, because you are in that sector where trust is a big thing.
Of course.
Credibility is a big thing. So how do you overcome those challenges?
Yeah, I think one, at least I have learned a lot from Amazon, having that customer obsession, right? So I think a PM who doesn't have a customer obsession, like eventually would not be respected in their own company. Like at start, it may look like, yeah, this guy is like fine, doing great, but unless you are the face or the voice of the customer inside your company, I think you're not gonna go too far. Now it depends on company to company. Now, if you take it to an extreme example, right, that I am a person who has a great customer obsession and I'm into lending. I as a PM would not care too much about risk and go ahead and give loans left, right, center, which is eventually gonna hurt in any case, right? So keeping risk in mind all the time and tweaking the product and creating it specifically for a customer can handle both the situation at one point in time, right? So for example, I'll give you an example what we did, right? So we entered into something called a supply chain financing. So it's a channel financing that people who are into a supply chain, starting with a retailer, distributor, C&F, manufacturer, right? And of course, there are bunch of people in between, stockists, super stockists, right? You pick up any two person, there's always a credit cycle between two person in that supply chain, right? Now, typically, while we are looking at that customer profile, we are seeing that traditionally only a term loan was extended to these customers, and term loans are especially that you have to give like a loan for like 3 years, 5 years. The person may not be in need of a loan for 3 or 5 years, right? Then you can always give like a short-term loan. And that's where industry created something called an STTF. It's called short-term trade finance, that a loan is extended to you only for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and a small loan, which is for you to purchase something, right? You can avoid risk by controlling the end user fund, that not giving the loan directly to the consumer. You can pass on the loan, you can transfer the money or do the disbursal to a person who this customer of yours eventually had to pay, which controls the risk a lot, right? And then make finer tweaks into the product that where you can extend smaller credit lines to a customer, and then eventually look at with your customer management, look at this customer again and again, and then keep increasing it, right? Where this customer would be at times okay with like a small line of like, let's say a customer came to you for like 10 lakhs and you go to him that at this point in time, I can extend you a 5 lakh rupee limit. And then looking at your repayment track records, I'm going to increase at every single point in time, and maybe in some time in future, we're going to reach 10 lakhs. Looking at it in a silo that, yeah, this guy came to me with like a 10 lakh rupee loan amount and I just rejected it, is not a great CX. I think empathy is not just needed in fintech or finance, it's across. And I think most of the successful company, if you look at, they go into the most finer details, I would say. They reimagine the customer journeys. They simplify onboarding. They go crazy on personalization. They look at data like anything. They have a great data mindset, I guess. And I think most of those companies are off late trying to keep tech at first, where they are trying to solve all those issues by technology and by digital solutions. So I guess this can be solved, but empathy is like a much more topic which I think everybody eventually has to embrace. So if you are not empathetic, I think product management especially is not a role for that person.
Yeah, so true, so true. So in the last, I would like to ask you one thing, Jatin, is if you get invited to your college, okay, I know where you did your computer engineering, and they ask you to speak to your new batch students and explain them what kind of skills they need to develop to be a good product manager. So what are the top 3 or top 4 skills you would suggest?
I think this is somewhere related to the question which you asked, that what are the shift in like last 5 to 6 years, right? So if you see 5 years back, a product manager was a person who was more or less like an owner, and they were like 15-20 year experience in like large enterprises. Of late, not just in startups, in big companies, I see that freshers out of college can also be a product manager and join maybe at a junior level, and it's called an APM, associate product manager, and eventually go up till chief product officer, right? Of course, before I answer that, what I would want to tell, that that one thing, that how much a person has this common sense and how the person is looking at customer problems is, I think, key, which we are trying to look at. But coming back to the answer, what I would like to tell it to my customer, the kind of skill sets which they should be developing. See, at a philosophical level, a product manager should be able to define a problem statement really well. And once you have defined a problem statement really well, solutioning becomes quite easy. So I think solution is somewhere hidden in that problem statement. If the problem statement is defined like really well, if you have not kept it extremely convoluted, there are these concepts about problem solving, XY problem solving. You can read about it later. That sometimes product manager, what they do is they try to explain a problem X, thinking, and they start doing solutioning in their mind, and then they get stuck at a certain point, and then they start explaining that X to their team members or colleagues. But if they explain the whole thing to their, and if they give the entire concept, the solution altogether may come different. So at a philosophical level, that is there. But to come to such thing, right? How to develop this skill set? How can you create like a great problem statement? Is by looking at data. And by looking at data is just not. It does not mean that just looking data at for the sake of it. I think great product managers are who knows exactly what data is to be looked at. Not getting into the nuances of like how to fetch this data and how hypothesis which you have created, which you would want to test. Try to fetch that. Try to look at it, and once you have got it, then see that what are the areas which you could improve, and then create your metrics upfront, and then see that these are the particular solution who, if you would eventually implement, is going to move your metrics up or downwards, whichever way you would want to move. And second is, I think for product managers, I think they have to be great storytellers. So maybe after looking at data, you have created like a strong conviction around something, but eventually you have to convince the leadership also to invest in you, to get like the product going, and then invest in this. So that is the second thing which is extremely important. If you go with like 100 charts to like a senior leadership, and that is all saying, right, they have an attention span of like 3 minutes, right? So you have to be great storyteller. First you have to tell exactly what you want to do. Most of the times, if you have told it in a great way, they are more or less convinced, right? You should have done a lot of background like work or homework around it by looking at data, but that should not come out in your presentation. Presentation should be like as simple, should be put in as simplistic a way it should, right? So I think data, storytelling, customer obsession, keeping yourself updated, what's happening. Find these product managers like really cool. They install hundreds of apps to figure out what's happening in the industry, going to the minutest level of a UI, that these are the latest UI interactions, what is happening, understanding other functions. Of course, other than tech and decision sciences role, they also understand how operations work. Should never be shy of taking up any work, right? So if you were to do something extremely manual your way, I think product manager should be the first person who should execute it, for it to understand that how it is being worked, right? So interaction with all your team members, I think that is really important.
Cool. Thank you, Jatin. I think thanks for these wonderful words of wisdom, and thanks for your time today. So all our listeners and subscribers to our channel, if you have any questions, any comments, so please just post it below this video. And if you have any suggestions on the new topics, please also mention that. We'll be more than happy to cover in our coming episodes. And thanks to everyone. Stay safe, stay connected.